Yeah. I think motivation is going to be a huge difference. So I think that there's things that in the secular workplace they do, and they do the right action, but a lot of times the motivation and the reasoning behind it isn't what's best or isn't coming from a biblical worldview. Um, if I'm a secular employer and one of my goals is employee retention and engagement, I might offer a good benefits package. I might offer a flexible work environment, and I might give them my employees enough leeway so that they feel valued. Like that, those are all good things. But the motivation is coming from I'm just trying to engage these employees and retain these employees. So it saves me money. So it's less work for the team. Where from a Christian worldview, you could see it as how do I love my neighbor? How do I actually bring in the loving characteristics of Christ into this relationship as a form of discipleship or evangelism?
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into the Built in Faith podcast. I am your host, David Hemm. And today we have a special guest in Adam Cravens. Adam, welcome to the podcast, brother.
Hey, glad to be here.
Well, man, we are going to kind of kick it off the way that we always do on this podcast, which is first off, tell me a little bit about yourself, man. Tell me a little bit about your background. And if you even have the opportunity, I'd love to hear your testimony as well.
Yeah. So a little bit about my professional background. So just to start from the very beginning. So my background is in HR, but the way that I got there was just as I was exploring what I wanted to do in my career. I was looking through the role of classes and majors, and I knew I wanted to do something in business. So I was looking through it in the business school to see what degrees there were. And there I landed on HR, like the idea of being a leader or being to help leaders be better leaders. So my first job, I worked at Dairy Queen, and I saw in that first job, and this is the same time of me looking for my major of what I wanted to do. And it's like, I saw how important leadership and management was to engage employees, to get a better service and product out to the customer. And so that's really was my driving motive for selecting the major of human resources. And just as I continued to study that and understand how organizations work, those things all were appealing to me. I loved just understanding the complexities and how to organize things, make things work, to see a vision, to put it into practice, and how that impacts the employees, which ultimately drives the outcome to the client or the customer. And so that's really what I got into it. I wanted to help leaders be better leaders. So that's where it started. And from there, so I went to school, got my bachelor's degree, and then went on to get my MBA in HR as well, and have a certification, PHR, Professional in Human Resources certification that I've maintained. And then I've worked for the last 15 years in some capacity or another in HR. So I started back as an HR assistant, entry-level role, and worked into different industries, different sized companies. I've worked at mid-sized companies around 500 employees, companies with 800 employees. I've worked in a Fortune 100 company for 6 years and did HR there and project management, consulting, and been in technology, and currently sitting in a marketing operations role, and HR is a part of that role, but really it's a lot smaller company, much more of a startup environment. So just got experience really in all different avenues, industries, and types and sizes of HR. So that's kind of where I've come from.
Yeah, man, you've worn a ton of hats in your time, and you have a very large breadth of experience over different industries, different sizes. So it sounds like the piece that you like most, though, about the HR side of things is more of the strategic kind of business side of stuff, more than, right? If we look at HR as usually two hats, there's like an administrative side of it, and then there's the actual strategic business side of things.
Yep.
Kind of what led you to be interested in that side? Like why chase that side of the business?
Yeah. I mean, in addition to the HR background and interest, I also have been kind of an entrepreneur at heart. I've always wanted to own my own business. I had the opportunity of owning my own home services business for 6 years, 5 or 6 years, and sold that. And so the idea of building something from the ground up, or to cast a vision and think through it strategically. So I like to come back to the beginning to work through what's the end goal, put those pieces into place. That's what's more interesting to me. Like back when I played video games, like I would play like the NBA games. I would rather play the GM mode and just play the GM mode and not actually play the game. So that's just what was interesting and fun to me, is just how to organize all the blocks, put them together, and then execute. And partnering with a good execution person or a manager has been a great fit for me to come along and coach managers to see the vision, put it all together, and then they go and implement and put that into action.
That's great. I'm curious, is there anything like in your childhood, like growing up, is there any kind of things that you see that kind of worked you towards, kind of the guy that you are today, and this strategic thinker, the one who would rather play GM mode on the video game than actually play the game? Do you have what kind of led you to that?
Yeah, maybe it's just been my lack of athletic ability and not really that skilled at actually playing, but liking to think about like different games or sports. Like growing up, I enjoyed like games like Monopoly and like that were strategy focused. And even today, like I'd rather play those types of board games. My wife likes the party games where you just have fun and act silly and but I like to think about it. Like I would play dominoes and cards growing up with my grandparents, and it was just something that I was just more drawn to. I like thinking more than just not thinking, I guess.
Did you ever play the game Stratego?
I haven't heard of it.
So this is like a core childhood memory of mine, because we're similar this way. And my dad played this game growing up, and he had brought it to us when I was a kid at some point. And it's basically capture the flag on a board. So you have different pieces that have different numbers, and so you move towards one another, and like you can attack another player, and then you both flip them, and the higher number wins. And you're trying to like strategically work through to find out where the flag is hidden. And like each of the players has different capabilities or whatever. But like growing up, that was the game we played. It was called Stratego.
Yeah.
It was stuff like Rummy, Monopoly, like all the strategy games. So
Yep.
same with my wife, of like she would rather her family played all the fun party games. That was not it. And whenever we try to play those, it's like, are you sure you want to play this with me? Like this, you usually get frustrated if we play strategy games.
Yep. Yeah. My wife doesn't like to play games with me. She feels like I always win those. So
Yeah, I get you. I'm in the same situation. Well, brother, why don't you tell us a little bit about your testimony? I'd love to hear
yeah.
just, what your walk with Christ, what your background was leading into it, kind of what Christ led you to, and then kind of where your life looks like now, and how you're plugged in.
Yeah. So I grew up in a Catholic home, and so we went to church consistently. My mom's side of her family is they're all church going Catholic members of the Catholic faith, and so that's what I grew up with. And so there was an appeal and a draw to me from an early age, I would say, that to God and to who He was, and trying to discover what that is, and kind of how that played out in truth. And so really in my, I would say, early college years, I stepped back and just was kind of like, what is true? And I went on this journey of trying to discover, all the way down to the foundation of, is God real? and wanting to just start with that question and work my way up. Like I said earlier, I like to start at the beginning and kind of just work through the practical outworkings of what seems right or best, and kind of keep going from there. And so I came, to the conclusion that God was real. There was no way around that. And so then it was which one. And so through researching and thinking and praying and asking God to reveal himself to me, I landed on, the Catholic God is right. The God of the Bible is right. All we have still, that doesn't answer the question of, is Roman Catholic the correct belief or not? And at that time, I landed more on a general faith, kind of just like a biblical Christianity. And so it was more Protestant at the time, didn't know that term, but it was just like, I'm trying to read scripture. And so when I got to this place of like, feel like pretty confident that I had a good handle of the direction that I was leaning towards in my faith, and I got a Bible. We started attending church with my wife, and we, I got this study Bible, an NIV study application Bible. It's the Bible I got. That was the Bible that my church used at the time, and just picked that up. I was like, I want to read this. I remember telling my wife, like, if I'm going to commit myself to this, like, I don't want to be one of those people who have like this on fire for Christ moment, and then they flake off in a few months or a year. It's like something comes up. And so she's like, you won't. And so I got that, and I read through that whole thing, every word, include all the commentary, all of it, in like 15 to 18 months. And that was my foundation. And so I was attending church consistently, and it just kept growing in my faith. I think within 2 years, I was leading a Bible study at work. Like, I was on fire for Christ, and I was just getting so much out of my own study. I'm just like, everything was like light bulbs going off constantly, and just couldn't keep my mouth shut about it. And so I had the privilege of leading a Bible study for a couple of years at my work then, and then just kind of kept growing from there. I've grown in what my faith is. And so, my wife has come along with me on this journey. We've both been growing significantly over the last, I guess, over 10 years. And that's kind of where I came to faith. I remember one day, like the moment, like I was praying, I would pray all the way up till like I would feel convicted to pray, and your will be done, like in surrendering just some of the earthly things that I was used to experiencing. Nothing like crazy, but just like, I was like, oh, I don't know if I could live without these things, and so I would pause and I'd hesitate. And that happened a couple of times. And then one day I'm like, your will be done. I surrender. If you want me to give up these things, I'll give them up if that's what you want. And so that's kind of the day that I remember as like really surrendering to Christ, not just trying to believe upon Christ for salvation, but also surrendering to him as Lord. And so just been running hard as I can since then, leading different Bible studies, getting plugged in at church, really refining my own theology, reading other books, and like kind of narrowed in on more of a Reformed Baptist view at this point.
Man, that's great. It's awesome to see kind of the path that God uses to draw people to himself over time. We all start in different places. God draws us from different places. So it's always incredible just to hear the amazing stories of what God has done and continues to do in the lives and hearts of people. So one thing I want to ask you is, and you even kind of touched on it a little bit here with the Bible study in the workplace comment, but I think that's one area. And so I'd love your perspective as a HR professional. I think there's a lot of people, a lot of Christian business owners who would love to incorporate a lot more of Christ into their business. But I think there is a real concern, like what can I do? What can I not do? How should I be thinking about this? So, from your standpoint, like as a Christian HR professional, what advice would you give? What kind of things would you have them think through of how can you incorporate a biblical worldview into their business, and specifically into, the human resources side of their business?
Yeah, I think there's a great need for that. I think as a business owner, you have a little bit more freedom. Like working for a Fortune 100 company, like I have in the past, there's limited freedom in that. So there is value in being a smaller company where you're the owner. You have a lot more freedom than you realize, I would say. Like I think there's probably more of a cultural expectation of what you would, how much you would bring Christ into the workplace, and maybe even your own limitations. I don't There's not anything that precludes you from bringing Christ to the conversation. I think that there's going to be more legal aspects when you think about hiring and making decisions based on faith. Title VII protects employees from discrimination based off of religious affiliation or religious beliefs. And so if you are a Christian business owner and you don't have a distinctly Christian business per se, you would just need to be sure not to be hiring focused only on Christian hires. Like you would want to be thoughtful about that. And like bringing biblical principles into your work is totally acceptable and valid. Like I mean, honestly, if you really go to like the best business books, you could extract all those principles out of those books and say, okay, this principle was already found in scripture before it was ever written in this, you know, number one selling business book. And so that's something that is fascinating to me. And I think that we as Christian leaders need to go back to the Bible and find the biblical principles to lead by and follow Jesus's example. There's books out there that try to do that too. And I'm not saying they're not valuable, but I think sometimes we forget how to use the Bible, and then we just start to rely on someone else's words and we start to adopt another language when I think we could in our culture, in our business, to even use biblical language. And if it is a Christian business, I mean, there's a unique thing. Like if you're obviously churches and nonprofits that are Christian, they get exemptions to the way that they hire and select and make decisions internally because of that, because it's a distinctive and there's protections that you can do that. And even Christian businesses have some freedom there. You would want to do it in a careful way, I would say. And we could talk more practically about that, but really identifying up front that you're a Christian company, you have Christian values, like, you know, thinking about the aroma of Christ. It's either going to be attractive to somebody or repelling to somebody. And I think that we can play offense, if you will, up front rather than trying to defend it later. It's like just put it all out up front. And then they also get a realistic preview of the job. So if somebody isn't a Christian and they come into your workplace and all you do is talk about Christ and these biblical aspects to having a biblical worldview to running your business, they knew what they were signing up for when they accepted the job offer. And again, it might repel them out, and who knows, there may be an opportunity to, you know, bring the gospel to them and see a life transformed right before your eyes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's great advice, right? Like you want to be very open at the front about what it is that you believe, what you stand for, how you come to those conclusions. And then that will do a lot of the protecting for you on the front end.
Yeah, I just think about like when I get to know somebody initially these days, like I'm pretty, like one of the first things that I confess is I'm a Christian, because it makes the rest of the conversations I have with them so much easier. If you live next door to somebody and you just did the chit chat and you've never really shared who you are, like what's your identity, which is in Christ if you're a Christian, and then like 6 months later you want to invite them over and share the gospel, that's going to be it's going to be a lot harder, more awkward feeling. And because our feelings are going to impact us. Not that they should, but they do. They affect the way that we go about living our lives. But if we're up front right off the bat in our own personal lives and in our business, it's going to make those conversations easier. As you know, we're a Christian company. As you know, I'm a Christian, and this is why I live this way. It makes it so much easier.
Absolutely. So let's put on your strategy hat for a minute here. So I know part of the thing that you like is creating structure, right? And building upon that within an organization. How do you do that? You know, again, with a Christian worldview, you know, I guess, or we can phrase it this way. What would be the difference? Like what differences would you actually see to someone who's trying to do that, who's trying to apply the Bible to this area? What kind of differences would you see in your business? Like what would it do that's different?
Yeah. I think motivation is going to be a huge difference. So I think that there's things that in the secular workplace they do, and they do the right action, but a lot of times the motivation and the reasoning behind it isn't what's best, or isn't coming from a biblical worldview. Um, if I'm a secular employer and one of my goals is employee retention and engagement, I might offer a good benefits package. I might offer a flexible work environment, and I might give them my employees enough leeway so that they feel valued. Like that, those are all good things, but the motivation is coming from, I'm just trying to engage these employees and retain these employees. So it saves me money. So it's less work for the team. Where from a Christian worldview, you could see it as, how do I love my neighbor? How do I actually bring in the loving characteristics of Christ into this relationship as a form of discipleship or evangelism? Like there's a greater cause and a greater mission. It's not just about what I get out of it. It's how do I play a role in advancing the gospel? And I would say that's the big shift. It's really a mindset shift. And I think, there might not be any major mind-blowing differences in the way that you'd run the business. It would be more of why, and it's to the glory of God, not to the bottom line of my business. So that would be the biggest change. It's a paradigm shift.
Yeah. And I think, a big and good paradigm shift will impact, right, many things. Those are great examples of how, if you're actually seeking to love your neighbor, how does that look? How does that play out? What are ways which I can do that? And you had mentioned this before, just like the idea of Christian business owners have significantly more leeway as business owners, like to be able to do some, cool things within their business and be able to be more open about their faith in their business. It's a lot harder working for someone else and trying to make that same kind of impact, for the business. So, one thing I'd like to hear from you is the work and faith movement is starting to become kind of a bigger deal these days. And it's been around for a long time, but it does seem like we've reached this point where I think the church is beginning to wake up and see that there's a lot of potential and a lot of value that can be had from Christians in business. So I'd love to just get your take on that. What do you think about kind of this resurgence in this area? What are you hoping to see kind of come out of that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's great to see a greater emphasis on living for Christ. And I think there's multiple reasons we're waking up in the culture. Like I think over the last several years, we've gone through some unique experiences with the whole COVID thing. And I think that's woken a lot of people up. I mean, you see homeschool rates are trending upward, and it's like people are just like, what am I doing with my life? I think it's just like this pause and reset, like why? And I think we got to keep asking that question. And I think work has always been important. We've kind of got caught up in the American dream. Work is supposed to be easy and fun, and I can make a bunch of money and I can go do whatever I want to do. Like, I don't know about you, but I grew up being told I could be whoever I wanted to be. And I think that, we're forgetting that God is in control. Like God is sovereign over it all. And I think, when we live submitted to that, and I think with this movement coming in, I think people are starting to realize these other values are starting to they're growing really big. Like you look into all these different companies and you have all these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. You got these things called employee resource groups, all these other groups of people, like these protected class people. I was talking about Title VII, like you have different genders, different races, different sexual orientations. All these groups get special treatment and special privileges. And I think as a Christian, I think you're starting to wake up to like, something's not right. Where's the Christian group? Because a lot of these companies will not allow a Christian group. They might even and there's even some companies that will let like different faiths have groups, but Christians, they won't. There are some that have just turned off religion altogether. And, if you're going to not allow Christians at least be consistent on the topic of religion, but many aren't because they're blinded. And I think when we live and work in an environment that is constantly coming against the Christian. It's like, no, I got to stand for my faith. We need equal rights to, we're seeing challenges to liberty, religious liberties and freedoms. Like we don't get to be as open about our faith as we ought to. And you see this with politics. Those are the two things you're not supposed to talk about. But we've recently, secularly brought all these things back into the workplace, but only if you talk about them a certain way. And I think people are just waking up to that reality. And I think people are wanting to find and associate with people who share their values and beliefs. I mean, we all want to do that. Like that's the church, right? We're unified in Christ. We come together and it's an exclusive group, but we're united in Christ. And so we want that. It is normal for humans to want that. We've let the world define that for so long, and Christians are waking up and saying, hey, we need to have our own way of voicing our faith and who we are. And so I think that's where we're at. I think people are now being drawn to people with shared values, and that matters more.
Yeah. I mean, and you think about how important it is in the church just to be in like-minded community, be around people who believe what you believe and are working towards the same goal. And it seems like even in the Christian workspace, right, it's a similar thing of, going through problems and working through problems that other people are also going through who have a similar mindset. We're trying to do the same types of things. Is helpful. It just points back to God's design and community with people. So even here in this, and as we do work together, and even our distinctive spheres, wherever we are, there seems to be a need for Christians to get together and talk about those things. I think, there's so many groups starting between Faith-Driven Entrepreneur and C12 and, there's groups everywhere these days doesn't matter what you're doing, but there's a group for it. It's because there's a need. People are still trying to figure this out. It's almost like a restart of like, how am I supposed to do this? How am I actually supposed to incorporate the Bible into my business?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a tremendous need for people to be leaders in that and to help walk through that. Which is why I appreciate a lot of what you're doing. You're trying to go ahead and teach people and lead people into how do we marry these things? How does it look like for the Christian to not be two people, but to be a Christian at home and to be a Christian in the workplace?
Yeah. I think so many people want to do this, and I think it's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of the day to day, and you're just executing your to-do list, and you forget to think strategically about how am I bringing biblical application to what I'm doing. And I think we need one another, like you talked about. Like we need community. It's reading in Hebrews this morning. Hebrews 3:13 tells us to exhort one another every day. Like while we call it today, exhort one another in these truths and remember why. And it's because we need to be reminded. Like we don't go to church always to get a new lesson, a new teaching. We go to be encouraged and reminded of what we've been called to do. And so that's what I love to do. I want to come alongside, and I need people to come alongside me because I don't have it all figured out. I need to be reminded and exhorted day by day to live for Christ and to bring that into our business, into our work, and keep the priorities because we can get so caught up in these side projects or just doing this task that can be put on autopilot, and that it's important that we continue to reevaluate our lives, pull out the things that are taking up our time that aren't central to the mission and calling that we have, and have somebody in our corner to remind us of what we're going after and be encouraged and even given advice from time to time.
Absolutely. And so the other part of this that I think is important to hit on in this is that we are incorporating Christian values in here. And I think sometimes the belief is, well, if you're doing business as a Christian, somehow it's second rate or second tier. It's not as good because you have to make some sort of compromise in the way that you do your business. So it's not going to end up as well. What do you think what's the Christian call? What's the Christian call in the way that they actually do their work? for people. What
Yeah.
is that? Should that be the expectation? Should that be kind of the view of how Christians are, just kind of lackadaisical and just getting by? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I mean, that'd be a direct contradiction to what we've been commanded in Scripture. We're supposed to work as if we're working for the Lord, and we're called to work with excellence and do all that we do as if we are serving Christ when we think about serving others. And that is, when you think about that, we're supposed to be thorough. We're supposed to do well. We're supposed to do excellent work, and we're supposed to do it to the glory of God. That's the highest calling. That's supposed to be greater than what just a worldly motivation, a temporal motivation ought to bring, because there's a greater purpose in that. And I think so many people seek out purpose in their work and yet don't find it. But we as Christians, like, it is the work of the Lord to work. We get to advance the gospel. We get to disciple. We get to be the light in the world. We get to be the example and the role model to the world of what hard work looks like. But we can do it with a smile on our face, with hope and joy, because we know this isn't the end and that there's greater reward. And we're working for the eternal kingdom. The riches that we're obtaining are stored in heaven, and we're not worried about the pocketbook today so much as how do I invest in the eternity? And that's got longer implications. We're thinking generations down the road as opposed to my retirement.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true, right? Proverbs says a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. There's an implication there that Christians are working hard, and they're working to an extent that they have the future in mind, right? Just not just beyond our generation, not just beyond this moment in time. I think it's the American way of thinking, or, I don't know if that's generational too, but this, like, work hard, retire early, spend it all, and then that was it. That was your life, and what a difference the Christian worldview has on that sort of an idea.
Yeah. Retirement's a foreign concept. Like, we are called to work as long as we're able to work. And yeah, that'll change as we get older and become less capable. But now even so much of our work is done remotely, and a lot of it's not as physical task. So that would enable us, I would think, theoretically, right, that we could work longer, even if our minds slow down. Like, to think of working to retirement is a short-term goal that doesn't really align to a biblical worldview. It doesn't mean that we can't retire, but what are we to continue doing? Like, it's not to go sit at home and go on zillions of vacations and enjoying the good life, because there's no meaning and purpose. Like, without hope, we will wither away and eventually die. And work is a means in which we have to fulfill the calling that Christ has for us. Like, even the widows, right? They're not supposed to just sit at home and be lonely or bored. They're supposed to either go out and invest in the next generation or to get remarried. And there's an ongoing work, and it's for their good. It's not just to give them purpose. It's also for their good, to keep them from sinning. When we stop working, we become sinful. Just reading to the kids the other day about where David and put his eyes on Bathsheba, and he was kind of in that I'm going to relax type of stage, sitting back, and it led him into sin. And so work is a good thing when used properly. It actually advances the gospel in ways we don't think, and it prevents us from living a lifestyle that may not align with God's will and intention.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just so important. There's a sense in which God created us to work, right? We talk about how work was created before the fall, and it was in that when things were very good section. But it's in the kindness of God that he gave them something to do. You think about Adam and Eve in the garden, and if God had not given them a task to do, they had not provided work, like it would have been a very strange circumstance to just, like, what am I supposed to be doing here? I just sit around, like,
Right.
what do I exist for? But he actually gave them tasks. Like, he actually gave them something to do. You're supposed to do something, and you see people crumble. And you're right. Like, I mean, I've seen plenty of men who really struggle with retirement, and they've worked so many years and they've worked really hard, and all of a sudden they don't have that 9 to 5 anymore. and you can actually physically see them begin to deteriorate. Like there's an aspect in which we are to work, and right, and that's not to say that at that stage of life that you necessarily need to be earning a paycheck for that work that you're doing, but you're definitely not supposed to be idle. Idleness is what will begin to rot you away. You got to be doing something. To your point with the widows, right? Even then, you got work to do.
Yep. Yeah, it'll look different, and we take that as stride. It doesn't always mean, like you said, economical work, or within this professional line that we've been in all of our career. We got to continue to do that. But there's work to be done, and it's a good thing. And I think when we think about it and are doing it to the glory of God, we're supposed to finish the race, right? We're supposed to run the race all the way to the end, and that's part of it, is being faithful to whatever God would have you do. And it's not idle; it's to work. And so let's find a way to do that faithfully to God for His glory.
Absolutely, brother. Well, man, I appreciate you jumping on with me today. I appreciate this conversation. So, man, where can listeners find you? You know, where if they want to follow along, they want to see what you're up to. Where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, Adam Cravens. I think it's just LinkedIn /Adam Cravens. On Instagram at Redeemed Leader and Facebook at Redeemed Leader. So that's how you can find me, just on social media. But that's where I hang out. And then obviously you and I are working together with Imago Day, and you can find us there.
Yeah, man. It's exciting times over here at Imago Day Insurance Advisors. We've been able to, Adam and I have been able to come together in partnership and just continue to bring more value to Christian employers. There's a great need for human resource help. There's a lot of compliance, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of questions around what you can and cannot do as a Christian in business. And we want to be able to be those partners with you to honor Christ in your workspace, to love your neighbor well, and know that you have a partner in us, that we can go ahead and walk alongside you, navigate those changes, navigate those things. And again, Adam, you bring a tremendous amount of experience to this, and are a huge benefit, and will continue to be a huge benefit and blessing to many employers as they work with you and navigate some of those challenges. So I appreciate you. To all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Built in Faith podcast. Again, I am your host, David Hemm, and we will see you next time.